talk to me. I don't repeat the words. Don't try to make me feel all right.
Hey, this is American Reckoning podcast, and we're going to be talking about the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States flag and its origins and why we think that it's a load of crap, to put it bluntly. And then, the U.S. flag in general, what it means today. So make sure you, if you're watching us, we're on YouTube and on Rumble as well. So when YouTube goes crazy and wants to click us off because they think we're some racist, anti-American, anti-whatever, white supremacists, maybe Rumble will keep us. Although we're none of those things, if anybody's ever watched our podcast, and don't be afraid of the Confederate flag. Actually encourage you to find out what it really means. But anyway, I am Paul and he is Aaron. So we're gonna talk about here the Pledge of. Oh, make sure if you really like the podcast or whatever, make sure you like it, comment. I guess that's supposed to help us in ratings and that kind of thing. So I appreciate that. So thanks for joining. So the Pledge of Allegiance is something that is an oath, if you will, to the United States flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's the pledge, I think. Did I get that right? I'm not reading it.
Yeah, no, that was right. We all said it hundreds of times as kids, right, in school.
Right.
A lot of schools don't say it anymore.
Yeah, for other reasons. Why?
Maybe they're not saying it for the wrong reasons, right? But,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But the Pledge of Allegiance, is something that was put in the public school system, was advocated for. But what can you? So you did a little research on who actually wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, and we've talked about this guy. Do you want to? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I don't have I have approximate dates off the top of my head, but a lot of people think the Pledge of Allegiance is something that might have gone back to the founding or something like that, and that's not the case. It wasn't written until sometime in the 1890s by a minister named Francis Bellamy, who was a self-professed Christian socialist. There were a lot of these at the time Marxist types that were around, and he wrote this in the pledge in the spirit of kind of where the very centralized and progressive and very leftist, even by today's standards, things that were going on in the United States that a lot of people don't realize were going on. But they were, and I'll kind of leave it at that for the moment, but I will get into some more details, I'm sure, later as we go on.
Yeah, I mean, this is still during the Republican held. The nation was highly Republican at the time in politics, post Civil War, right? And this was maintaining sort of that Lincolnian, the Lincolnian Republican way, and the United States was becoming a everything that the founders didn't want. We were getting involved, starting to slowly get involved more and more with foreign affairs, and so we were looking to become, we're more nationalist. Okay, the states' rights, the states' sovereignty issues were lost from the war. The Confederate side, the Confederacy, wanted to preserve those states' rights, and we clearly diverged away from that big time. And part of that is this, we had to have an identity. So the Pledge of Allegiance was one of those things that was brought about. And we in the a lot of countries, and certainly within the, even in the Confederate side, just to kind of compare that. They make a salute to the flag. They don't necessarily pledge an oath. You know, the Confederates salute the Confederate flag, and it's a very short pledge. So it's, you know, there's a difference there.
And not to mention several states had their own salutes to state flags as well.
Right. So, and state flag, that was the tradition. So exactly, Aaron, that's exactly right. The states would pledge or salute their own flags. This was the first time that we saluted or pledged to allegiance to the larger United States flag. And then I believe what was it, 1923? I don't remember the exact dates. I think it was in 1923 that they added the word indivisible. And what's the
indivisible was original.
Was it was original? Okay.
That was original. Yeah. It was, they added to the flag in the 20s. And you may be right. It could be 23, but it was definitely in the 20s. But yeah, I pledge allegiance to the flag. So that's when they added
flag. Okay.
Yeah, because the original one, which we could pull up here, didn't have the flag of the United States of America. That whole phrase was added in the 20s. And then under God was added, I believe, in the 50s because of communism and other things like that. They wanted to make sure we had God in there, which that's not a bad thing. But yeah, indivisible was the idea from the beginning.
Yeah. And so that, of course, that's put in there purposely, you know, indivisible. They don't want, you know, at this point, the states' rights and the ability of states to be sovereign was shattered.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted us at one United States.
Right.
And, you know, this is a lot of people argue this is, you know, this is a big thing of whether we want to continue to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Because the flag doesn't represent what it did. It didn't represent the same thing it did back then in the 1890s. It represented something different all through its course, from the original 13 colonial Betsy Ross flag all the way through the 1830s and 40s, the war with Mexico, of course, the Civil War, and then on into World War I. You're continuing to gain more stars, and then World War II, there was a 48 star flag, and then what we have today. So it's meant something different. And this is, I think the crux of where I have parted with the Pledge of Allegiance of the United States to the United States was over the recent Reconciliation Memorial, the Arlington Reconciliation Memorial coming down. Now, prior to that, I've always been kind of rolling my eyes, and I know you probably have too, Aaron, about even saying the pledge. It's just kind of one of those things. But now I think it's actually severely detrimental, and you know, I just think it's a terrible thing to pledge. I think in terms of the Confederate side, after reconciliation, which happened late 1800s, early 1900s, where you had, you know, at least three presidents begin to reconcile the war, and the North and the South become more one nation. I'm sure many Southerners were pretty uneasy with that, but they agreed to go along with it. They agreed to go along with this reconciliation stuff because they wanted, you know, even what after Robert E. Lee said after the war, he wanted to, let's put our differences down and let's be good citizens. Let's go home and try to make the best of things, even through Reconstruction, whatever, and bury the hatchet, whatever, and go on with our lives. And a lot of Southerners, you know, respecting General Lee so much through the years, even way after the Civil War, they agreed to do that. They agreed, and so many, they followed his lead. And then so many Americans from the South fought in the wars, ever since the Spanish-American War, through World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and anywhere else. Southerners for many, many years latched on to the United States because, this is our country. We were supposed to do this. Let's put our differences down. Things have changed again.
Yeah.
And it is like, we're trying to preserve our Confederate history, our Confederate heritage, our graves, our memorials and monuments, and the current. And this is the crux, I think, of what the real problem is. The current United States, the current pledge, the current United States flag is not representative of the America of our forefathers, not just mine and ours in the South.
Everybody's.
Yeah. We are being taken over internally by communists. And I'll say it flat out. The Democrat Party, as many people know, if anybody opens their eyes, their way to power is to use Marxist theory, cultural Marxism, whatever, anything they can. They don't care anymore. So what snapped in me, and I'm a veteran, so there's implications here about the United States flag and going to war under the flag of the United States. I had it on my uniform. It's different time. I went to war to kill terrorists, to fight terrorists overseas so they wouldn't come here. I mean, everybody's own personal reasons about whatever, but it was clear, in defense of the country and family and home and so on. But that is not that's not the case today. The current, and I use the Biden administration, but even the Congress, and I'm pointing the finger at the Congress too, because it really supposedly represents the states and the most American people, the president just being an executive and he runs the administrative state, which is just not the worst, but because Congress has divested their authority and given a lot of it over to the administrative state or the president.
Right.
But anyway,
most of it really is that, and going back to the 17th Amendment, that's when the Senate stopped being appointed by state legislatures and started being popularly elected. So really, you referred to the states there, I think in a slightly different context than I'm about to mention, but the states have no representation. Every representative is popularly elected. That's one of the many ways in which the positions of the sovereignty of states has been undermined, over the past, 150 years. Going back to the pledge real quick, one of the things that I object to about the Pledge of Allegiance is that it is anti-Jeffersonian. A lot of people don't realize that there's a difference between guys like Lincoln and guys like Jefferson. Their ideas don't get along. They are not commensurate at all. They are on opposing sides of virtually every issue. So you can't, and a lot of people, as patriotic Americans, grew up thinking, everybody kind of got along. There's one nice continuous story of American history, and isn't it great?
Right.
The truth is, the political struggles that we see today are reflective of various Federalist, anti-Federalist struggles throughout history. So the Pledge of Allegiance, with its indivisible talk, that is not something Jefferson would have espoused at all. Jefferson actually espoused divisibility. And this goes back a long way to when Virginia had a lot of the territories like Ohio and everything. These were Virginia's territories. And Virginia wisely chose to divide and separate in the direction of more humane government. And so it basically said, yeah, go ahead, split off, form your own sovereign, you could say sovereign, or really just distinct political communities, make states, whatever. So the Jeffersonian idea of separating and creating political communities that were more responsive to the people in those communities is completely undermined by this whole idea of indivisibility.
We've totally gone way beyond that. Where the representatives in Congress do not represent the people anymore. They represent their donors, big time donors, special interests in their own careers. It really, and this is not the same United States. And that's the point. That's the point you're making. That's the point. And when the going back to the Reconciliation Memorial real quick, the current people are so hell bent on destroying the South continuously, taking down the Reconciliation Memorial. Some of them are just useful idiots, right? And they don't know anything, and they see anything Confederate as racist and white supremacist and the patriarchy and all this other horse shit.
Right.
Crap. Sorry. But others, they really are masterminds. They see this as a divisive thing that they just wants to continue to throw the wrench in the machine and cause so much hatred and division.
Yes.
In which to eventually get power.
Right.
Yes, there's a part of that. But irrespective, the United States is becoming irredeemable.
Yes.
We are losing. We are being destroyed from within faster than you can shake a stick at.
Yep.
And it's not just the Confederates. They were talking about William Penn. I don't know if that's been stopped yet right now, but it's coming for all the founding fathers. It's coming for all of U.S. history. And that I don't think that's even in doubt anymore.
Right.
So why play? So the question is, yes, you have some family members who have veterans. I know I do. Both my grandfathers were in World War II, and one of them in Korea as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got all of us have grandparents and family, because wars were a big business for the United States. You know, so we latched onto that, and we were a better country then. We're not now. Yeah. We are not. Remember the Congress. In that last episode, the reconciliation, the Congress was responsible by an act to name this create this naming commission, which then acted as an administrative state, as a capacity in the administrative state of the Department of the Army. They're the ones who sanctioned this. Mm-hmm. Remember that.
Yeah.
That is everything.
These were political decisions.
You don't think that, right? And it's like,
and their enlistment numbers are lower than ever. I mean, they're having trouble recruiting, and
white males. Well, imagine that. It's
almost anybody. There's lots of patriotic people. You don't necessarily have to be white that don't like what's going on. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
But I think they think they're going to help the situation. They're going to meet their recruitment numbers by doing this.
Well, they've got a bunch of illegals coming across the border. They can just. It's so easy to get them. It's like, oh well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can think about it.
Potential. Yeah. I mean,
you join the U.S., join the Army, and then you're no longer any illegal. So
it wouldn't be the first group of people coming to the United States in large numbers that ended up in the Army.
Yeah. Yeah. The war for Southern independence was a big eye opener for that type of thing.
Irish and Germans started flooding in, especially the Irish at that time.
So I wanted to read some of the arguments, even within this happens to be within the SCV, but I think it's important because, we don't represent the SCV, but, for this show, but I think the arguments are important and they're valid. And I'll read a couple that are pro Pledge of Allegiance and U.S. flag and everything, and some, against it. For removing it. So 2 and 2, just to be fair. And this, I'll just make one thing. These were written right before the Reconciliation Memorial came down. So I don't know if this would have changed some more minds, but it certainly did for me. It was like the last straw. Yeah. But anyway, so I'll read a couple of these real quick, and then we can kind of go through and chat about them. But after reading so this is one writer to the editor. We are all Americans and should be proud of the fact, this is a pro argument, obviously, that there is much evidence of our Confederate ancestors being patriotic Americans under the Reconciliation movement. That is what the monument in Arlington represents. So clearly didn't, this is before. Many United Confederate veterans, which is the precursor to the SCV, reunions featured the U.S. flag on the reunion medals. Also, the first program of the first annual reunion of the United Confederate Veterans in 1890 featured the U.S. flag proudly on its cover with J.B. Gordon, a Confederate general who was also the first commander of the UCV. In the collection of the U.S. Library of Congress is a photo of Confederate veterans marching during the 1917 North Carolina UCV reunion, led by two veterans carrying the U.S. and battle flag. We all must not forget that most members of the SCV are also proud U.S. veterans. Reciting the pledge affirms our respect to our veterans, not just SCV members. God bless America and the Sons of Confederate Veterans. All right, that's one. It's kind of, not a huge argument, but that's a nice opinion. And
not a bad point.
The next one is why the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, he's responding. These are my thoughts from an earlier encounter with this question. In the June 2023 opening ceremony of the Georgia Division reunion, there was neither a U.S. flag on the stage, nor was there any effort to pledge allegiance. Good for you, Georgia. Camp 91 was represented by three members, two of which were Vietnam veterans. Collectively, we were totally shocked by this, but not knowing if it was merely an oversight or done on purpose, we kept decorum. When this was reported to the camp membership on June 27 meeting, there was severe consternation. I was charged to write this letter. It is fair to say that our membership, as conservative members of our society, is disgusted by current events and behavior within our country. I've written and published considerable information regarding my distaste, but in all cases, I've tried to convey solutions to the problem, and I have done much to promote change. I mean, there's a couple things that stand out. I'll stop right there real quick. But so he thinks he's a conservative member of society. I guess that's kind of arguable. And then he says, and I have done much to promote change. I mean, even some of that language, you hear this, I want to promote transformation and change, transformational change. I'm so sick of this promoting change.
What kind of change is he talking about?
What are you talking about?
Is he talking about it specifically regarding this issue? But he doesn't. That's the thing. Well, and anybody who fancies themselves a conservative, now I get it. Saying the pledge is something I did patriotically as a patriotic American growing up. I get that. I totally get that. Members of my family in the service. I never served for reasons I won't go into, but military history in my family, recent ancestors in Arlington Cemetery, I'm a patriotic American. But you grow up not knowing the history of the pledge.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's part of your vision of America, but the problem is it reinforces something that is incorrect. It's incorrect. There's the indivisible part is anti-American.
Yeah.
That's great team building language. That's great.
It's great if you want to, even in the Lincolnian time, and this is what's so important in the Lincolnian times, post-war, Civil War, they're hell bent on building this new nation, and they have Marxist tendencies.
Right.
And the pledge is Marxist. It was written by an avowed socialist who wanted change.
Right.
So this is an indoctrination device.
Sure. Yes. Well, and keep in mind the Lincolnian, angle that this all, where this all exists. People need to remember that Marx was a fan of Lincoln. Why would Karl Marx himself be a fan of Lincoln? This is well known. Marx wrote twice a week for the New York Tribune. All right. He wrote Lincoln a letter of congratulations when he got reelected in 1864, and Lincoln responded to it. All right. There are a whole bunch of Marx's stuff that you can access. So people need to realize that if you don't like this leftist stuff, you need to realize a lot of these things in our history that we took for granted as patriotic things to do are not patriotic things to do. And we are playing in the field of the left. Yeah. We're playing with their language on their field by their rules.
So there, exactly. And so when you describe yourself as a conservative conservative member of society, are you?
Right.
You sure about that?
Yeah.
But then you say promote change and all this. What?
Yeah. Are you
Yeah,
using that modern kind of leftist
you know,
language in order to
Lincoln had, you got to remember, Europe was already toying with the socialist crap in the 1840s and 1850s and 60s.
Sure. Yeah.
During the war, before the war, and during the war, people, Union generals, some of Lincoln's generals were Marxists. Go ahead. Go. You know, what is that guy? Heinzelman, I think, was one of them. There's several Union generals apparently that were totally fine with turning the United States and you know, hoping the outcome would be what it was.
Right.
Which is a one nation that they can slowly turn into socialism.
Right.
And I think if people knew that a lot more, they would look at the Confederates and go, you know what? You guys actually were friggin' right. You were right. And I'll read on here. Never once have I ever, though, thought of showing dishonor or blaming our United States flag. Since Betsy Ross, George Washington, and others designed our beautiful banner, it has stood for all that is and was great about the United States. Our grandfathers, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, children have served in the military in our country, and many have died protecting the flag. Sure, it seems our country has lost its way, but why on earth would we discredit or dishonor the flag? That's like blaming a child for not being an adult or blaming a cat for not being a dog. It is silly, it serves to prove nothing, and it is extremely bad optics.
It doesn't look good, is what he's saying. You know.
Okay.
So now I parse this issue. I've done it before. I think the issue of the pledge is more important than the issue of the flag, but I would contend that because he brings up the Betsy Ross flag and he mentions America, the United States, at a time in its history when it was completely different than what it was. Well, a little bit different at the beginning than what it was even when the Jefferson was first elected, and the Jeffersonian Revolution lasted for about 60 years. So slightly different even in those two times. Then it was tremendously different after the so-called Civil War, and a huge swing to the left, centralization, incorporation, all these things that would have driven the founders up a wall, even though a few people at the time were pushing for it. And then you had this time kind of when the progressive era came around. You know, the flag looked different. Our flag was different at different times. Some people, you know, I don't know if this is in the flag code or something like that, you know, but people have contended to me that the flag at any time means the same thing throughout. I totally disagree. That can't be true. That can't be true. You know, and the flag seems to be the symbol to people who, you know, at different times, but even people who coexisted at during the same eras. Like I've said earlier, the flag can't stand for both Jeffersonian things, Lincolnian things, and the modern Marxist state. You know, I mean, it can't be all things. It can't. It's gotta. So what is it? And we could fight over what it is, but one of the things we can do is look at the character of the United States at different points in its history and say, all right, the flag looked like that at that time. Clearly, this is symbolic of an era, which is why Revolutionary War reenactors don't fly a 50-star flag. It's representative of a time that they are obviously a big fan of and do a lot of good education and things on. But I contend that the flag does mean different things at different times, and I'd far prefer a Betsy Ross flag than the modern 50-star flag of the administrative state. And don't forget, you know, a lot of us had recent ancestors that fought and died in World War II, as did I. Mm-hmm. You know, the administrative state was already pretty heavy duty by then, but they only had 48 stars at that point. Knowing the history of the flag, when the whole state representation thing, with the stars and the blue field, our country has changed a lot, and that's when I hear what you read that guy say, I understand where he's coming from, but I think he's mistaken. I think he is not stupid. He's clearly articulate, and he clearly is trying to get a point across articulately. But I think he is ignorant of the history of these things. And I think anybody who is, people really need to start looking at this. Again, the United States is not a story of continuity. It's a story of discontinuity.
Correct. And it's representative of different phases, different times over the last 230 years. So, anyway, just real quickly to finish up his comments, he basically says, and for me and my family, we're American through and through, fly American flags with pride. Thank God every day I was born Southern with its unique history and heritage. I have a great honor and privilege to pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, free and justice for all. I write this letter with the greatest humility. Then he says, I pledge to do my part to meet the charge. God bless America. God bless South, et cetera, et cetera. So, that sentiment is strong. And I think, for me, and I'll read these others real quick, but I think where I separate from his thought, and it's not that I don't appreciate and know his thought, because
you've lived it yourself.
We lived it.
Right.
I mean, you ready to die? Take a bullet in the face for the American flag in combat? Yeah, you're gonna know a few things about a connection to something. But what I will not tolerate is and I'll get into this at the very end here, because I'm going to bring up some biblical stuff which has set off America on a very bad path. And I will bring up a friend that from his writings that I think brings it very clearly into view. But where I separate is which has long been overdue, our country is being run by corrupt, immoral people. And they have charge over that flag now. And it is that, I mean, I don't think the end is in doubt. I think it's going down. But I'm not going to willfully anymore pledge allegiance to something that I no longer see as representative of my country. Mm-hmm. And I don't see it that way. So that's just, and again, this doesn't mean that it can't be sort of brought back, that somehow, some way America can right itself. The odds are really low. Right. I hate to say it, but I changed my mind. I wouldn't mind if it was rewritten, except from
I would contend that you're not being anti-American in the statement you just said. I think you're being.
No, I think you're being.
I think you're being originalist, though. I think if you're talking about Jeffersonian principles, which was my point earlier, you're not betraying a thing by saying this thing was an artificial thing that was implemented pursuant to a political and ideological agenda.
Right.
Which wasn't that long ago, really. I mean,
yeah,
it's getting long ago now, but
it doesn't represent. It doesn't. If you see what's happened to our country, it just doesn't feel right anymore.
Yeah.
Be honest with you, you feel especially when they're tearing down so much of their own Americans. The Congress is going after and dividing its own people, its own Southern people against the rest of the country. Like that idiot Biden and those nitwits talking about. I mean, use the Trump MAGA people he's going after. Look, this isn't going to happen just for the Canada. It's coming after Republicans. They're looking for a cataclysm of division and hate.
Yeah. Well, it's necessary for them to eliminate our culture. It's if they're going to cede our sovereignty to one world bodies, which is ultimately going to be their goal.
So let me go on with the next two here real quick. And these are for removing in favor of, removing the pledge. So this gentleman asks, why is the Lincolnian mantra still recited at camp meetings and events? It epitomizes everything that is contrary to the SV and the sole reason I no longer attend meetings. So this guy refuses. Even if there have never been a war for Southern independence, this mantra would still be totally contrary to our original founding as a federal or federated republic. Mr. Jefferson, and he's talking about your point of view.
TJ, right?
Yeah, TJ and the other founders would have bristled at the thought of reciting such a pledge, given that none of them thought of these United States as a single nation,
Right.
indivisible, rather a voluntary compact of sovereign and independent states, any or all of which could also voluntarily leave that arrangement at any time they choose. Mr. Jefferson viewed Virginia as my country, just as did most of the other founders of their respective states. Only Hamilton and a few like him had the more nationalistic view of things. Local camps should retire this collective mantra. And if they want it, replace it with anything, replace it with the pledge to the flag of their own particular state. This would be much more in line with both those who founded the Federal Republic in the 18th century and those who fought to retain it in the 19th. Very, very well said, I think.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and not an anti-American tone.
In our case, it would be the state of the pledge to the salute to Virginia.
Right.
And if you look at it, read the language to it, and I don't have it up here, but so the Virginia state flag, for example, is I salute the flag of Virginia with reverence and patriotic devotion to the mother of states and statesmen, which it represents, the Old Dominion, where liberty and independence were born.
Yeah,
so,
that language probably comes as a surprise to those people who are fans of the Mayflower Compact, but there is a view of a very New England centric founding, which not exactly true.
Well, not true at all.
Right.
It's kind of, yeah. So let me read this last one here. And this again is pro for to removing the pledge. Summers of the pledge. I realize we have numerous veterans in the SCV. Discarding the pledge is not meant to be an insult to them, their service, or the U.S. flag, or their country. If everyone knew the history of the pledge, they might come away with a different opinion than the one we have all been indoctrinated with. In reciting, quote, indivisible, unquote, it flies in the face of our ancestors who seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. It is nullifying the right of secession. If we are to honor our ancestors and live out the charge, which goes against what the other gentleman wrote, how can we go about reciting the Socialist Pledge of Allegiance? I know veterans who have learned the truth about the pledge and will no longer recite it. It is a socialist and has no place in SCV functions. To go a step further, the U.S. flag has no place in an SCV function, yet the Confederate veteran is full of pictures of Old Glory in its each issue. What part did the U.S. flag play in the years 1861 to 65? Under it, our ancestors were murdered, looted, burned out of their homes, and raped. I would wager there's no Confederate flag at any U.S. event, yet many in our ranks want to show that we are still good Americans by displaying it at SCV events. Personally, I fly the Betsy Ross upside down for distress on my porch. There you go. Because it represents the same principles as the Confederate battle flag. Also, the Third National flies high in my yard. So, you display Old Glory in your yard, fine. Fly it and be proud of it. However, remember that from 1861 to 65, our Confederate ancestors were not flying it. The SCV is about that time period in honoring Confederate ancestors who struggled during the period. SCV events are not the time and place for honoring a flag and other than representing the Confederate armies. We preach about telling the truth in our history, yet most do not know the truth about this pledge. We must arm ourselves with knowledge and truth, and if we are properly to defend the honor and slandered ancestors who fought to prevent this mess we live in today. Wow. I highly concur with him because remember, he's writing this even before the
probably
the Reconciliation Memorial came down, and so that's when it officially. It's almost like I gave Congress one last chance,
right,
to see if they would stand up and hoping beyond hope that something would be done legally at the last minute to save that amazingly beautiful memorial.
Sure.
And they did not. There was I think 40 some wrote a last minute letter, which was a political gesture.
Right. Which was on the other hand, you think that this kind of negative, passionate type of thing with people who took down that memorial were doing, you'd think that there would be some mechanism to slow that type of just irrational I mean, just
Well,
destruction.
you would think that they would stand up. That even people on the Union side, on the Union Union veterans,
Well, yeah,
somebody in anywhere would have said, "Wait a minute, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
But it just shows you the underhandedness that the power.
Yeah. Well, it shows you how radical they've become. None of the mechanisms here. They are taking monuments and headstones out of cemeteries. It's like and you'd think there'd be some mechanism where cooler heads would prevail, but no. It really shows the really bad state of affairs in the Department of Defense. Yeah,
and so pledging allegiance to this flag, pledging allegiance to the United States flag, I just, again, this is going to differentiate this a little bit from the oath to the Constitution, for example, or even the national anthem, I guess.
Right.
I mean, I just wanted to, I was so sickened by this, and I have not changed my sentiments one bit, that I just wanted to disavow my service, to the Army and in defense of, I don't regret the stance I took at that time. But looking back, I can say that had I known then what I know now, I would never have volunteered, for service of that nature. But anyway, that's my opinion. I'm allowed to have it, right?
Right. Exactly. You are.
I think, and I think that I wanted to read something here, unless you had something else specific on the pledge. This kind of talks about our whole country and the republic, the United States constitutional republic that we're supposed to have. And everything from that has been downhill. I'll be honest with you. It's been a dissolution of those principles, biblical. And I got this from a gentleman, Ted Whelan, and I wanted to read it to you because I think, and now again, it's quoting some from the Bible here. So it's just an amazing thing, predictions on if you don't follow those godly principles. And that includes, you can look at yourself in the mirror as an American and put an American flag up, or a Confederate flag, any daggone flag. Put a flag behind you and honestly look in the mirror and ask, are we upholding those principles? And as we disintegrate, why are we disintegrating so fast and quickly? So, so I'll read this. The United States Constitutional Republic was destined to fall from its inception. This is borne out in the following passages of the Bible. Quote, and everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man which built his house upon sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. And that's from Matthew chapter 7, 26, 27. And then also from Matthew, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. Matthew chapter 12. The house known as the Constitutional Republic was not built upon the rock and God's word, but instead upon Enlightenment and Masonic concepts. It began and continues divided. Quote, the day is therefore approaching when the Republic's cup of iniquity will be full and God's long suffering is exhausted. At that time, the Republic will be subjected to his judgment. I think we already are. Like all nations before her built on sand, she will cease to exist. The question that remains is whether that generation's Christians will be prepared to build upon her ruins. I hope the South will. If not, another ungodly nation will fill that void until finally a future generation of posterity are prepared to erect a government and society upon God's righteousness as expressed in his triune moral law, which are commandments, the 10 commandments, statutes, and judgments. Quote, is therefore incumbent upon this and all intervening generations of Christians to do everything in their power to help prepare for that future generation of Christians, or this one, to do it righteous the next time. Now, he's a little bit more This is from his online book, A Biblical Constitution, Scriptural Replacement of Secular Government. But, he's a little bit more thinking that this is long over.
I agree with him, except I don't think of it so biblically. I agree it's been long over. I think.
There were others who were not biblical, like a lot of people know Alex de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where you've got, and I think, I'll read that, but you're right. The founding, Jefferson was not a huge Christian, if I recall. Is that correct?
He
versus like Patrick Henry.
Sure,
they were very close.
He had a major interest, but a lot of people think maybe he was more of a deist, and he wrote his own version of. There is the Jefferson Bible, which I have a copy of and haven't looked at in a long time. But so he definitely had. He was at least culturally Christian. You know what I mean?
He was smart enough to know to look back and bridge time, the antiquities, the Greek and time that Aristotle did, so on, and apply that to the modern situation in which he lived, and he found himself at that time in the 1760s and 70s and 80s and so on. But he knew the incredible principle. Look, let me remind people, George, these people were at risk of being hanged.
Right.
Okay, you have to have a set.
Yeah.
To keep clear-minded, and you cannot go to war, believe me, and be anywhere near a combat situation unless you are praying on your knees to God.
Right.
And you can, but you think you may be in an immoral setting, even in that situation, but you will fall away.
Right.
And you're not doing your troops or anybody else any good when you're not praying for their salvation and for guidance and protection from God. So Jefferson, Washington, you think Washington took, what was it, Christmas Eve? He takes all these troops, underfed, underclothed, freezing to death, crossing the Delaware River to go pop some Hessians, an entire few regiments of Hessians,
right.
The best professional army in the world at the time, besides maybe the British, and surprise them and destroy them, and then stick around and then beat the crap out of the British up at Princeton in the next couple days. Do you know you cannot do this kind of thing without the moral high ground, the moral principle. That to me was a miracle. Right. In many respects, America is it is a miracle. But the point here being it was built on this amazing foundation, and it is going down.
Right.
The people like Lloyd Austin today, you compare that piece of dung to George Washington. And George Washington was a Federalist. He wasn't he was an army, he was a soldier.
Right.
He had a lot of land. He was an aristocrat at the time. But he was, I will give him that he was at least godly and at least, tried to as a compromiser during this time. But let me bring up one more thing here. And this is Ted Williams again, talking about, and I'll bring up Tocqueville here, but he's talking about America's greatness and God's blessings came by means of the Constitution and its government. If you believe that, many people believe that, and that goes into the discussion about the pledge and, America's greatness and the flag and all this. Just the opposite of true if you believe that it's all God's blessings and came by means of the Constitution, the government. A classic case is, and here he's Isaiah, God, the Bible blesses nations, makes them great and prosperous when they look to him as their sovereign, and thus his moral law as a standard for government and society. And that's Deuteronomy chapter 4. And then he reads the Psalms. And then consequently, America's greatness was the result of the 17th century colonial governments of, by, and for God established for his unchanging moral law. And this was Alex de Tocqueville. And he was quoted as saying, they, meaning the 17th century colonial governments at the time, exercised the rights of sovereignty. They named their magistrates. They concluded peace and declared war, made police regulations, and enacted laws as if their allegiance was due only to God. Nothing can be more curious and at the same time more instructive than the legislation of that period. It is there that the solution of the great social problem which the United States now presents to the world is to be found in perfect fulfillment of Deuteronomy, by as an example. And I continue to quote him. Remember, he's writing this in 1835. Quote, amongst these documents, we shall notice an especially characteristic, the code of laws promulgated by the little state of Connecticut in 1650. The legislators of Connecticut begin with the penal laws, and they borrow their provisions from the text of the Holy Writ, copied verbatim from the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. So, America began to be cursed, and this is in Ted Whelan's words, by God's long-suffering only incrementally at first, when the 18th century founders replaced the 17th century colonial governments with their own humanistic government of, by, and for the people, based upon capricious Enlightenment traditions. Without repentance for these sins of sedition, our complicity therein, it was inevitable that America would find herself teetering on the precipice of moral depravity and destruction. So that
it almost sounds like he's making a case for the Puritan founding.
Well, the thing is, though, and this is what the founders, and man, this is a whole other discussion here.
Yeah, I don't want to get into it now. It's an interesting.
I don't want to get into it now, but I think what he's trying to say is, this is one of those come to Jesus moments. It's like, what do you really believe?
Right.
Either you're going to follow God's laws and principles, at irrespective of the time. He brings up 1650 and the Connecticut Puritan. Let's be honest. Some of them were correct. Some of them were crazy and what's the word? Some of them were not so moral, I guess, or I don't know. But I think what they try to do is at least create laws and they're in their communities that put God first. So carrying on that tradition, and you fast forward up to the 18th century when Jefferson and Patrick Henry, all of the Anti-Federalists and Federalists are fighting over this Constitution. And I remember there was a time when even Benjamin Franklin, in some of the secret some of the public meetings in the convention and some of the secret ones, he was saying, why are we not saying our prayer? Right.
The truth is, didn't they used to pray a lot before some of those meetings, Well,
that's and I bring up that point about George Washington.
Right.
During the war, I guarantee you they were praying.
Oh, yeah.
They were praying constantly. But when the war was over and everything was fine and dandy, right?
Maybe
we don't pray so much anymore.
I see where this guy's coming from. I'm not entirely sure I agree, but I'm not entirely sure I don't agree.
It's very challenging. It's challenging.
He takes an angle I'm unfamiliar with. It seems to me, from today's perspective, I think most people, except for those who know, and plenty of people do understand this, in the history scene and even others, people lived their lives through their church up until even the early 1900s in a way that we wouldn't understand today, where you didn't marry outside. I was going to wear mine also.
I'll bring it up.
But where people didn't marry outside their Christian denomination, Right. Methodists didn't marry Baptists. You know what I mean? Now nobody cares about that stuff. So say what you will, but people definitely had a strong connection to their faith through their church, through the community. So I don't know if I would say it as extreme as he did, but But
I think the main point is that we've long diverged from
Yes.
that biblical principle.
I certainly
think that's
agree
the
with
main,
that. I
and that's
certainly agree
why,
with that.
and that's my point in using that to
Yeah.
tie into today's. Again, why are we pledging allegiance to something that
Has
not
betrayed
even
us. Yeah.
betrayed us? It's the,
Yeah.
I mean, arguably it could even be anti-God's principles.
Yeah.
What are you going to do then? I mean,
Yeah.
but again, for me, I was willing to just take it and do the reconciliation, Robert E. Lee, take the high ground thing. No, I don't. No, I'm done with the pledge.
Well,
I'm done with representing the flag and all that.
Well, and you remember Lee's the alleged Robert E. Lee quote we were discussing the other day, where you actually looked it up, and I was driving or something, but remember it was the one where he said there would have been no surrender to Appomattox if he had known. Now the only problem with that quote, if he knew what was going to be done, afterwards, he said he would have preferred to die with his men, at Appomattox.
Yeah, but with a sword in his right hand, he would have preferred to just.
And the only thing that cast doubt on that statement is it was secondhand. It was.
Lee but it would have to be not that this is unknown, but it'd have to be a very well-known pastor blatantly lying, and it would have to be
it does come from a
governor of the state
source.
of Texas lying about
it.
I know. I think it. Totally,
the sources are credible.
Lee was such wanted to always take the high ground as best he could, even in the end in 1870 when he said that quote.
He would not have put that in writing. He would not
have put that in a letter or writing. But I could see him getting so frustrated and angry about Reconstruction and what the Yankees and what the government was doing, and just was a horror show of what they were doing to the South. And so no thanks. No United States pledge or flag or anything.
Right.
But hey,
a side note. We mentioned the national anthem. I just like to point out some very cool things about it, but also to remind people that, again, we didn't have a national anthem till after 1900. It might have even been the 1930s. I forget exactly the date, but yeah, a lot of these things we think, we just assume existed from some ethereal time near the founding are nothing of the sort. They are recent constructions, more or less for political reasons. But the Star Spangled Banner, though, everybody knows it was written by Francis Scott Key. The lyrics were, and they were written during the War of 1812, right? So we know those, and we know the song's very old, even though it wasn't the national anthem. But the melody was a pre-existing song called Anacreon in Heaven, which was an English drinking song.
Yep.
So I would encourage everyone to go and look up a version of Anacreon in Heaven, because it's pretty cool. But
Francis Scott Key was probably drinking a little bit when he did that, because they were watching they
were watching the explosion.
Fort McHenry was under fire by the British by getting blown up. That would have inspired a little. Anyway, hey, and one thing about the national anthem, what those idiot football players and sports athletes who little prima donnas are basically the useful idiots of a bunch of Marxists. Right. They're actually racist. They're not liking the national anthem because they think America's racist and whitey and the patriarchy and blah, the oppressor versus the oppressed. That's what they're using it for. That's not the same thing. But anyway, just want to clear that up. Hey, thanks to our sponsors, Valhalla Stables. I don't know if they'll like this, but Valhalla Stables down in Hounds down in Winchester, Virginia. They're our friends. Yeah. So anyway, hey, thanks for listening. Make sure go on YouTube and like us, and we're also on Rumble. So again, you got your thoughts on the Pledge of Allegiance and the U.S. flag? Go ahead and please comment. We love all the comments, even if you don't agree with us. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. Thanks, man. We'll see you next time. I am nothing more.